But yeah, so
Yeah.
why don't we move on then and talk about the two new teams in the league, starting with Nashville, because we've actually touched a lot on Nashville already. Um, but why don't we kind of lay out what we see and what we're thinking, and I already, my first bullet point on this is something I brought up already, is that I'm worried about their attendance and their fans that are going to be brought in. Um, we talked about, they only hit, as of the 23rd of January, I looked it up, only 70% of the team's sales goal for season tickets was met. So they set a goal saying we want to sell X amount of tickets. They're only at 70% of that, and the season starts in a month. That's terrifying for a brand new team when Atlanta and LAFC were sold out within a few days of um, being a team and opening up their ticket sales. And we talked again about teams like NYC who start off with these 27 to 30,000 averages and then drop below 20K at some point, and they're winning. So can you imagine what happens if a franchise like this that is struggling to sell tickets now starts off really really slow? They're going to be the next Colorado or Chicago, and they're not going to be able to bring anybody in, no matter if they start winning or not.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. It's definitely tough, especially as this league gets bigger and bigger. If you're not hitting attendance and there isn't as much of a buzz, especially if the results on the field start to decline, which I mean, looking at the roster, and we'll go into this in a little bit,
Mhm.
I'm not super excited by them. I mean, I'm sure they're still adding, but you just add all those factors together, and I just can't see them being successful this year.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it makes sense that they're not hitting their sales targets because, I mean, me personally, I just can't see anything that gets me excited about Nashville.
Yeah, no,
Uh,
for sure. It's a market that I think this is the market that they thought Atlanta was going to have when Atlanta got announced. This is what they were expecting. They were expecting problems like this because both of these are in the South where soccer isn't a big thing. It's a football controlled, American football controlled, um, market, and soccer was always struggling to punch through. Atlanta did it very well by doing it right, and it seems Nashville isn't doing it the right way. And that's something obviously to see as time goes on. You can't really predict it, but just off of what we're seeing right now, it's a little bit worrying, especially for a brand new team like this. But we'll let that take shape as it goes, and we'll take a look at that as it goes on day by day. But why don't we talk about their roster and kind of your first thoughts? We'll break it down position by position, but right now you look at their roster, and what is your first reaction?
Meh.
Yeah, same here, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, they have one DP as of us recording this, and Tani Mukhtar, who, and I'm someone who can name players in leagues all around the world. I've never heard of him. It's not as if an NYC Brandon David Villa or an LAFC Brandon Carlos Vela, the big name like headliner player that's going to draw attention and draw your attendance up. They just don't have it. I mean, I'm the biggest Dax McCarty fan, probably, well, second biggest. Sorry,
yeah.
Andrew. I caught myself, but I mean, even Dax being there just doesn't do it for me.
Yeah, Dax is the only reason I'm still kind of invested in this, actually. Um, for me, not super upset with the way they've done it. Um, so what I'll say about your DP comment? Did anybody knew who Miguel Almiron was when he came into the league?
No.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
he could hit. You know what I think the issue is you're right when you say it's not the name grabber. When you're struggling to sell tickets, you need the name grabber. You look at DC United was struggling, brought in Wayne Rooney, and they started, first of all, they started playing better, but it also gave more excitement in DC. And that's what they needed to hit right here. And they still have two spots open. They could look to hit another person. But you're right, nobody knows who this is. And he doesn't have this, he's German born, played in Denmark. He doesn't have this South American, really explosive, really exciting bit about him, right? So nobody really gets that feel. And I completely agree with that. and they really should have shot for somebody like that, and maybe they are. We don't know. However, I'm not terribly upset with what they've done. You bring in an instant leader in Dax McCarty. That is huge. It's the Michael Parkhurst to Atlanta if we're comparing it that way. You can give him the armband on day one. People are going to look up to him. They're going to respect him, and there's no question about that. That's something you need to build a team. Now we look kind of going forward, or actually, Connor, I don't believe you had a say on that.
I mean, I think you guys kind of touched upon the majority of what I was gonna say, but I guess the only thing I would add is I just feel like since Atlanta and Minnesota joined the league, there's just kind of been like the Atlanta way of joining the league and then the Minnesota way of joining the league. And I think that stayed consistent when LAFC and FCC joined. And I feel like it's trending that way again this year. And it seems to be like that's the way things are going. And if that follows the trend, then I can't see Nashville doing much the first season if they follow the same trend that Minnesota and FCC did.
That's a great point. Yeah, I completely agree. And and I think that's the reason why a lot of people aren't blown away by what they're looking at right now, because they're comparing. They're saying, "Are you coming in as Atlanta? Or are you coming in as Minnesota?" And that's the comparison. And when you look, are you signing big name, exciting, expensive players, or are you signing MLS vets, no name internationals, and maybe a DP that may or may not hit? And that's the comparison you're making. When you see this roster, you immediately go and think Minnesota. And I think that's a great point, and I agree with you 100%.
Yeah,
But
and I mean,
even, oops, sorry,
go ahead.
but even when Minnesota had come in, I mean, they had a Darwin Quintero. They had bits and pieces that you could see they were trying to create an identity. And we haven't seen Nashville play, so I won't comment on their fan atmosphere. But Minnesota has the Wonderwall. I mean, they at least have looked at teams in Europe and have seen this is the way we should be doing things. Whether or not the results on the field kind of went along with them, but I think that is something that they can build off of. Like, I think having the fan atmosphere and the attendance and that kind of support should come first, and then you can kind of worry about the stuff on the field stuff. If it went the other way around, I think that team would be worse off than they are.
Yeah, no, great point. So if we look, starting from we'll go back to front. I think the back part of this team, your defensive mid to your back line to your goalkeeper, lots of experience. You look at players like Joe Willis from Houston. You've got Dave Romney from LA, Eric Miller, who's bounced around to a bunch of teams, Dax, we've already talked about, and Daniel Lovitz, who's in, as much as I hate to say it, a U.S. men's national team outside back. and you look at that and you think, okay, it's not amazing. It's not something that jumps out at you and says, wow, these guys are locking down and giving up, 30 goals next year, and that's it, right? But it doesn't look at you and you don't look at it and say, okay, these guys are going to get ripped apart. They've got a lot in there that can you can look at them and say they're gonna stick tackles when they need to stick tackles. They're gonna cover. They're gonna gel well together, and you've got a lot of that. And their backside with that experience is going to be helpful for them going forward, I think.
Yeah, I mean, they have Jimmy Madronda as well, who's had a few years in the league with SKC. I think that's their strongest part of this team, arguably, as far as experience. And every time I look at this roster, it just reminds me of Cincinnati, where they're just going to throw numbers behind the ball and hope that one of the guys up top can do something.
Yeah, I mean, can't deny that they don't have a lot of MLS experienced guys. I'd be curious to know how the chemistry works out between these guys.
Yeah, interesting for sure. Like, you look at FCC, who brought in a ton of MLS vets and guys who have known the league before, and it took them a long time. And honestly, they never really did get going. Their last stretch of games was okay, but they never really got going and clicking. And it took a lot of intertwining and a lot of playing with that roster before you found something that stuck. So, that's definitely something that that can be an issue. And I think it is the least of their worries right now, because as we move forward into the midfield, for me, it jumps out as very hit or miss. You've got Anibal Godoy, who is, somebody you can play next to Dax McCarty, and they can both be really good enforcers, ball winners. Godoy is great passer of the ball. His stats, I think he hasn't had a season in San Jose where he had anything under 86% passing percentage, so he's very good on the ball. So you can have Dax as your ball winner, Godoy as your spreader, but Anibal Godoy also hasn't made more than 27 appearances in a year. They signed Derek Jones from Philly, who has always had this really, really high potential and has always gotten hurt every year. So it's something that, yeah, you're taking a flyer on him because he's got this high upside, but he could just go in third game, tears ACL. And then that leaves a lot of weight attacking going forward for Hani Mukhtar, which we talked about before, this German-born attacking midfielder who's going to be a part of this really, really fast and unproven attacking line. Excuse me, and we'll get there in a second, but he was a Red Bull Salzburg player at one point, which is, not to Red Bull, but he spent most of his time in Denmark, and he was the guy who pulled the strings, quote unquote, and I put quotes around that because he made a lot of these appearances and had lots of assists, but he ghosted in and out of seasons. So he had 3 goals and 4 assists in this 3-match span in November 2 or 3 years ago, and his next involvement was 2 assists in April. That's a big gap to have nothing going, and especially in a place like Nashville, if you don't consistently produce and consistently give balls that are going to help, they might have a really, really tough time this year, and that's what the midfield says to me.
Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, I think that any kind of creation is going to have to come through Hani Mukhtar, unless they sign another DP in their midfield. But again, I'm looking at their roster now, and in terms of creative kind of talent, I'm not seeing a whole lot.
Yep, and it's going to fall right on him. Thoughts, Con?
Yeah, I don't really have much to add on that. I feel like you kind of nailed it right on the head.
Yeah, right. So it's very hit or miss. It's very, very, lots of question marks around there. And then you go from that middle 3 that we were talking about before into an attacking line with wing plays and strikers that are extremely rapid. You got David Akam, Dominic Baji, and Abidan Ladi, all of whom are rapid and a little bit clever. Donladi's a little bit clever up there, but they usually miss before they make their shots, and that's worrying if you're in the shoes of a team like that.
Yeah, it just reminds me of Cincinnati, where their back line is the main kind of focus. They had brought in the defensive kind of midfield pairing of Dax and Daniel Lovitz and Madranda, and they're just going to have numbers behind the ball, kick the ball up to the 3 rapid guys up top and say, all right, have fun. See what you guys can do.
Yeah. Very, very low cost, high potential.
Yes.
And that's the view here. If you can make Mukhtar into somebody who you bring in for $1 million and you sell for $3 million, you're already making yourself money that you can reinvest in. And I think that's kind of Nashville's view here, is get in, get yourself rolling, and see what you can make and see what you can get out of it.
Yeah, I mean, if they follow that, maybe they'll follow something similar to Cincy, how they're kind of making their more like bigger signings now in the second season.
Yeah, definitely one of those. Can you survive the first year, and then get your feet wet, and then the next year you'll really try and make. And Minnesota did the same thing, right? And we're talking about, we're talking about Minnesota versus Atlanta, and you're right, very FCC, very very Minnesota feel of the lineup so far.